Hey, here we are around the table again. Got Chad and David with us. This seat keeps changing, so sometimes it's me.
Actually, the most intimidating was when I sat there.
Oh.
When I sat there, that was just off the hook, another level of just like, I got to perform
in the head
now.
seat. You got to deliver when you're sitting there.
But Chad will attest to this. He's done your intro.
Attest to this?
Well, no,
I might
attest.
attest to this too.
So whenever somebody else has to do the opening.
Intro? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Chad can do it pretty well.
Yeah.
Joe does it
I just
phenomenally.
wing it. I have no
I
idea.
can't do it. I don't know, dude.
You get nervous?
I just don't know.
Welcome.
Welcome to... But
So
anyway.
we're not doing you should have already seen the intro. So we're just going to sit around the table and chat today. Hey, welcome back to The Recap, where we discuss topics such as our vision, our values, and our sermons from week to week. The Recap exists to help us be transformed by Jesus. So with that, let's get started. So this past Sunday, we had two different sermons around the same topic.
Yeah.
In terms of what was it?
Generosity and
thinking about a legacy giving plan.
Okay, so related to stewardship, how we steward our resources and finances, right? So, David, you were in 2 Corinthians.
chapter 8. Yep.
Leaning towards generosity. So tell me about generosity in terms of leaving a legacy, the direction that we had here, because the two are linked together, I think.
Absolutely. I think this passage lends itself to that just because it's the Apostle Paul encouraging the church in Corinth to look at the example of another church that's really in a bad place. Like the church at Jerusalem, they're taking this offering for the saints in Jerusalem that are struggling, and just teaching them generosity, teaching them the value of, and where, of course, our generosity comes from. It comes from Christ and his generosity to us. And so I just kind of hit the subject of it's something to be celebrated. Generosity should be celebrated. And it's certainly that, is part of leaving a legacy for the church, for future generations of the church, as they watch those examples of other people's giving, keeping our promises, because in 2 Corinthians, he's really following up on a request he made to them a year earlier.
Right.
And that was really kind of my last point, keeping our word. When we say we're going to do something, we do it. And that's the encouragement the Apostle Paul's giving to the church at Corinth. Follow through on the promise that you made to help these guys. And he was super positive. I love the way this passage reads because he's being super positive. Paul's not always that way. And he's just saying, hey guys, come on, you can do it.
Yep.
And yeah.
So when I've heard sermons preached on generosity and stewardship, right? You hear the term, people say, I don't want to come to church. All they talk about is money. Well, I've been here 10 years this year, and I've never heard a sermon preached by this guy regarding you just need to give more.
Yeah.
Like that's never been the point. The thrust of it has been generosity, as you said a second ago, because God has been generous to us. We want to be generous in giving back. So when we speak of generosity, we're not necessarily saying that God is dependent on us to give, because he's not. It's his anyway, right? He entrusts to us a large amount of blessings, and we give back a small portion of what he's given to us, but he doesn't need it.
No.
Well, so if he doesn't need our resources, what is he after?
Our hearts. I think that's kind of what the point was when he's celebrating the work that the church at Macedonia is doing. That's 360 miles due north of Corinth. He's saying to them, these guys gave their hearts to God first, and because of that, they're willing to be generous. And so our hearts affect our giving.
Yeah.
The next chapter 9, God loves a cheerful giver, right?
Our hands
joy.
follow our heart, right?
Yeah,
they do.
So all of those things kind of came out, the promise aspect, the spiritual maturity aspect, not being compelled, not having your arm twisted, that came out in this text as well. So, yeah.
So God calls us to be generous now with our resources. giving to the kingdom, giving to kingdom causes, giving to the local church, but also giving those resources to folks in need as we are able within our own bandwidth of generosity.
Yeah, we went to the widow's mite.
Right.
We looked at what the example that Jesus gave about her, and it's not about how much we give, and he made that point really clear. I made a kind of a funny little point. It's not based on inflation either, right? And I know inflation's not in the text, but I mean it's something that we're going through as a country, and everybody I think around the world is experiencing the pinch of inflation, but they gave in spite of hardship, in spite of suffering. And I think that point came out. There was a lot there in 2 Corinthians.
Inflationary causes have shrunk my giving.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm sure that someone out there has an argument to be made from that perspective, but from our perspective, we would say, and from the text, we would say, man, generosity just continues. We just continue to give because God's been generous to us. So we give now, we're generous now. And Chad, we were in 2 Kings, and two different texts speaking on generosity, speaking on stewardship. This one got to a legacy, the type of legacy we want to leave. So one day we know this, that none of us is making out of this thing alive, right? So we are going to breathe our last one day, and the legacy we leave behind says a lot about who we are now and what we want to see happen in the future with what we leave behind. So walk us through this idea of stewardship and legacy living in generosity.
Yeah, I shared this with the congregation on Sunday. Walking through this with my father-in-law and my mother-in-law. My father-in-law recently passed away, and for the longest time, he just didn't want anything to do with a will or a plan or an estate plan or anything like that. And so, just watching that stress, then having to do many funerals here, I've seen that also in families that I've dealt with and tried to help and encourage, where one of the spouses would pass and there would be no plan in place for what needed to happen, and just the stress that causes. And just really, when you take a step back and you think about stewardship, like we have more than just money to steward. We have lives to steward. We have our time to steward. We have children that if you're raising children, it says they're a gift from the Lord. So we have that gift to steward, the gift of children.
Abilities.
Yeah, so we have lots of things to steward.
Yeah.
And we don't always think about the fact that some of these things last beyond our own life. Obviously, when we pass, our abilities are gone, our time is gone. But we have been managing or stewarding resources, and we've been managing and steward people, children especially. And so I just really wanted to hit home this idea of we've taught repeatedly about being generous. I mean, we've all heard sermons on generosity. We've heard sermons on serving others with our time, about using our time and talent to impact the kingdom. But I just never really heard a message on how to maximize those things you've spent your entire life doing, and how to maximize those even after you pass through an estate plan. And so we just really talked about legacy, about building a life that then flourishes even in eternity, even after we're gone, because we're able to pass that management off to somebody else who's going to manage it for the kingdom.
So overarching principle that I think is helpful for us between both campuses, speaking on the same topic on finances and resources, the things that God has entrusted to us, it says a lot about how we view God and His grace towards us, and how we handle those resources both now in generosity or in being a little bit more tight-fisted with your resources, and how we plan to use them later. We're saying, in a sense, when we refuse to give, we refuse to be generous, when we refuse to plan, that really we know better on how to manage our resources than God does, who gave them to us. I've done some study on this, and there's this thread of wisdom that God is calling us to, right? Be wise in how you steward your relationships, how you handle your family, how you disciple your kids. Be wise in how you handle other resources I'm giving you, like your home, and how you handle the things that God blesses you with. But then there's this other thought of wisdom in how we handle our resources, not spending everything that you make, not running up a large amount of debt, like you mentioned that Sunday, so that we can be generous. We can see the kingdom flourish. One of the questions that stuck with me over my years in growing in financial responsibility was, imagine what would happen if the church, the body of Christ, the majority of the church was debt-free. What kind of impact could we have now into coming generations toward leaving a legacy of generosity and pushing forward the kingdom even further, leaving resources behind so that somebody can say, I'm gonna do that again. So that's one of the commitments that we have made as a family, is to put ourselves in a position to be a blessing to others and not be hampered and hindered by debt, so that we can actually do some other things that are different. What would you encourage from both of your messages? What would you encourage the church to do? How should they act?
I will say this, and I mentioned this to Chad. I don't know if you were in the meeting earlier, Patrick, but a lady came up to me after the service on Sunday, and she lost her husband a year earlier, almost a year to this week. And there wasn't a lot of planning there. And she's felt some hardship this past year, and she's like, well, finally the check came through and all of this other stuff, the life insurance stuff, it all settled. And so she's like, I'm at a place now where I can help, but I'm gonna be on a fixed income, but I'm at a place now where I can help. What do I do? I said, number one, you need to listen to Pastor Chad's sermon. I said, go on to the website, listen to his, because he really's talking about this.
Right.
In his sermon, he preached from a different text today. She goes, oh, really? Yeah. I said, number two, I said, in May, at our little campus, we're going to do a series called Financial Peace University. And in a small group setting, we're going to give some more resources and tools on how you can, because there's a section in there. I mean, how many weeks is it? 12?
10 weeks.
10 weeks. And that really talks about what Pastor Chad, just touched on Sunday.
We'll be doing that in January.
Yeah. So she could do it in January too. But so that, I think that's a practical first step we can do, is just to look for good biblically based resources that dig into this subject of leaving a legacy. Would you agree with that? I mean, other things?
Oh, for sure. I mean, just looking at my own, we're just giving practical advice now.
Yeah, right now. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So practically speaking, I just learned from an early age, thankfully for my parents, to stay out of debt.
Yeah.
And so, like, for us as a family, we've just never been a family that took on a bunch of debt. And so that means saying no to things that other people are saying yes to, that we couldn't afford to do, places we couldn't afford to go. And really, you find out, especially in your early years, 20s and 30s especially, if you can say no to a lot of things then when you're in your 40s, 50s, and increasingly more so the older you get, you can say yes to a whole lot more.
Right.
People will say to me, how can you afford to go to Vietnam? How can you afford? It's because I have no debt outside of my house. I have some extra income to be able to do some things for the kingdom that I want to do and that I feel like God's called me to do, because I'm not making car payments and I'm not, but that was 20 years of saying no to a bunch of stuff that I wanted to do that my friends were doing I didn't do. So that's, I think, step one is stay out of debt or get out of debt. Number two is I've always, thankfully, again, back to my parents, I can take no credit for this. They taught me to tithe from a very early age. I mean, I used to get a 50-cent a week allowance, and I was taught that I'm giving a nickel every Sunday. And so I've just always been a tither. And I believe, again, it's not a name it or claim it thing, and I'm not trying to say, well, if you give, God's going to give you the, so I don't think that. But I do think that the spiritual discipline of generosity, of giving, of tithing, whatever you want to frame that, when you practice that, it does help you to be a wise steward of all of the resources, because once you really understand that I'm not giving God back something that's mine, I'm giving God back something that's his, it really helps to change the way you think about all of the things.
Yep.
So I would say for me, it's staying out of debt and always being a giver or tither have really helped me. And so now, transition to where this finishes, is now I'm thinking about, okay, I'm 47. I pray the Lord gives me 50 more years of quality life and ministry, but who knows? He could give me one more day. He could give me one more hour. He could give me 50 more years. I have no idea. But when I pass, I want to be a good steward of all those things that I've worked hard for 47 years, all of the good habits, all of the staying out, I want that to then multiply and snowball like a snowball rolling down a mountain. I want it to pick up steam. And I want it to be able to impact the kingdom at a far greater level than anything that I could even do in my own life. I want to see in my passing that the kingdom is expanded even beyond. And so it's back to estate planning and estate giving and those kind of things.
That's good stuff. My dad used to talk about deferred gratification as well. And he used to say, hey, learn to live off of 80% of what comes in. And of course, 10% of that,
save 10%, give 10%, and you can live on 80%.
And live off of 80%.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And he would always say the 10% as far as giving back to the Lord, that's a starting point.
Yeah,
that should be a starting
absolutely
point.
the starting point.
And, so that's good stuff. That's really good advice. That's good.
Yeah, recognizing from where it comes,
Mm-hmm.
and that he has abundantly more than we can ever ask for, than we can imagine in our minds to give and to bless people with. If you can't live on 80, you won't be able to live on the rest. There won't be enough. That you'll just never be
and I brought this
satisfied.
up Sunday because people always talk about, well, I don't have anything to give. But I think that's completely the wrong perspective. I mean, both in the story I read in 2 Kings chapter 4, and I referenced then to Jesus and the feeding of the 5,000, both Elisha and Jesus don't start with, well, tell me what you don't have.
Right.
He always says, well, what do you have? Well, in 2 Kings chapter 4, she's like, I have a flask of oil. Perfect. That's all I need. In the Gospels, what do you have? I have 5 loaves and 2 fish. Well, how is that going to feed 5,000? Don't worry about that. Give it to me. And so we're always worried about how we give what we don't have, but God's always worried about, can you just give me what you do have? You mentioned earlier, you preached on the widow's mite.
Yeah.
Yep.
She was giving what she had. She didn't have a lot, but she gave what she had. And God was able to do
according to her means, and even
means.
above her means.
Yeah,
and that's what I mean. And so that really kind of connects.
Passage, 2 Corinthians 8, I love where it says, "And they begged earnestly."
I know they begged to give.
They begged to give. Like, what kind of culture is that? Where people are like, "Hey, I want to give more. Where can I give it?"
Right. I want to find a place to put that.
Yeah, please let me help.
Well, I think David, you led with this understanding that our hands follow our heart. Right, where our heart is. If our heart is aligned with trusting the God who's given us good gifts and has been generous with us, we will be generous in return. It leads us to be generous in the future generations as well. So I want to encourage you, if you're watching today, you haven't seen either of those sermons yet or heard them, make sure you look on our YouTube channels, either the Church at Eastmont or First Baptist Kettering.
2 for the price of one.
2 for the price of one. You can really find them and say, hey, look, I want to hear about generosity. I want to hear about estate planning as we move into a season. Getting ready for that, we have an estate planning lunch coming
November the 6th.
November 6th.
Estate planning lunch, free.
Registration's
sign
online.
Up online at our website, fbckettering.org. But just come find out more information. It's not a commitment. You don't have to do anything except eat a free lunch, and we'll share with you how you can think about estate giving and how you can participate.
Yeah, great opportunity to hear about this, to start the process if you haven't done so. We look forward to seeing you in person this week for worship or online as well. If you haven't done so, look down below, smash that like and subscribe button so we can stay in touch with you and you can hear what's going on here at FBK. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's go out and be the church.